Thanks, first of all, for coming in. A few quick questions I have for you. Tomas, you talked about keeping control on the deers. I don't know how we're going to do it, for the simple reason I know that any place you'll sow a bit of new grass, you'll see them ploughing in from woods. Like, there's more woods and more woods everywhere. I just don't know how we're going to do it. The few questions I have, you might address that one, Tomas, on how you see us doing it. Hugh, first of all, thanks. You gave me help with a few different problems. And to the rest of you, I want to address this question. There seems to be a problem going around the country that, say, if I go down with 8 or 10 cattle, they'll come out in the department, a valuer will come out, and then the department might say, well, we don't like the price of that, we'll send out someone again. Then they'll send out someone again, and they won't give you a straight answer one way or the other, whether they agree with it or not, but they expect to bring your cattle. Now, not many people like to see their cattle going out to the yard without knowing what they're getting. And this seems to be a problem with the department the whole time, that they won't agree with price 1 or price 2, but they expect that your cattle will go up on a lorry without they having given you a price. And that's, I think that's a complete disgrace that a farmer, the least they should do is say, we'll either give you 1 or 2 and we'll battle it out for the difference. In the line of vaccination, and you talked about reactors, and educate me on this. My understanding was that when you take these samples, that it has to incubate somewhere. Now, I'm not a scientist and I don't know anything about it, but that it has to incubate, and that's why it needs a certain amount of days. Is that correct or not? Maybe I'm reading it wrong. They're vaccinating badgers, and I think we have to be careful too what we say, because I think it's what the badger gets at one place and he's pegged out of the den and he brings it off down the road to give to other cattle. Like, it's not just, we can't just say every badger is at fault now, in fairness. And sometimes badgers that are in places don't ever get infected, and you leave them alone, because the last thing you want to do is put them flying around the place. I think we should make sure we put out that message that everyone isn't just going out saying every badger in the country is at fault, or with deers. But the one thing I noticed in the badgers, my understanding is that even in the vaccinated badgers, of the tests that was done, the 10% of them are still, 8 to 10% are still showing up TB. Why is that? The other question I have for you is that if I'm a farmer on 30, 40, 50 acres of land and I'm working somewhere and I go down with TB, I don't get the hardship money because I'm working. Where are we at with that? And is there a situation, and like, we need to know this, is there a feeling among the farming organisations, no more than with us so many a time, may I say, because I'll call it out straight, that departments will bring you in to back question and have a meeting, and they'll be saying this, that and the other. Next thing, the following week they can announce something that mightn't be agreed with you, and that they just drive on regardless of who's there. Is that a problem, and is it a problem that they're not listening? Thanks very much.
Who wants to go first?
Okay, thanks very much, Chairman. Thanks very much, Deputy.
One last one, just before I wrote down a few bits. The pedigree cattle, I was at a fella that went down with, and went into an appeal job. But like, pedigree cattle are at a certain rate, and you could have the greatest bull in the world or the greatest cow of a pedigree, but they're at a certain rate, and that's it then, good luck. Is there anything can be addressed in that? Sorry for bringing that.
Okay.
That's perfect. Thanks, Deputy. And it actually falls in, and I might just pick the specific compensation queries first, or questions. And dealing with the pedigree cattle, what you're referring to there, Deputy, is clearly the ceilings within the scheme, which are not appropriate. It's supposed to be an on-farm market valuation scheme. As a farmer, if your animal goes down as a TB reactor, you're entitled to get through that scheme the value you would reasonably expect for the animal to get on the open market. Now, as we both know, Deputy, the ceilings currently weren't even covering some of the commercial cattle sold in marts in your own county and indeed across the country. That is under review under the live valuation scheme. There was a Grant Thornton review of that, and that is one of the areas that there has been changes sought and discussions are ongoing to agree that through the financial working group dealing specifically with the live valuation scheme. Key issues there: maintaining the independence of the valuers. The system has become way too prohibitive, way too constrained. It's effectively a box-ticking exercise with qualified auctioneers and valuers being paid to go out and write down tag numbers. So what we're looking for is a simplification of this system. These people are approved by the Department of Agriculture, having undergone a tender process, are trained then by the Department of Agriculture and have auctioneering qualifications and are selling cattle 4 or 5 days a week in the marketplace. We don't need a booklet of 40 pages telling them which box to push the weaning into and which box to push the cow into. So effectively, Deputy, in relation to the live valuation scheme, what is being sought here is a simplification of it. Let these experienced people go out and assess the animal based on their knowledge of the market and take away all of the bureaucracy around it. We referenced earlier the money that's been wasted sending department AOs around to sit in marts. To sit in the very mart that the independent valuer is an auctioneer in, to write on a page to send to Dublin, to send back down to the man that sold the bullock what price he should give for a similar bullock when he goes out onto a farmer's yard. So back to your other point, is the money's being used correctly and efficiently? Certainly not. There's another example. And then what's happening with the controls is there, as farmers we are not being allowed then get the correct value of our animal because that value is being hamstrung by bureaucracy and conditions around it. So yes, the ceilings are being sought to be changed. That's under discussion for all animals because it hasn't been just a pedigree issue, as you're aware, Deputy. Some high quality spring and heifers made well in excess of the 3,000 ceiling that's there. In relation to the information that the farmer gets when he's asked to accept or reject a valuation, you're 100% right. And this is an issue that we raised again last week with the department. It's not only on the second valuation. On the first valuation, the farmer has been asked to sign a V8 form, but there is no actual value of the animals in the V8 form. He's given a valuation sheet which might have 9, 10 animals on it, with in-calf, not in-calf prices, various prices, no total, and then he's asked to sign a V8 form. Does he accept the first valuation? But what is the first valuation? So this is a substantive point that we have made, and you're right, Deputy. The farmer has to be given full sight of the price that is on offer to him. And we accept there may be variables. If the pregnancy status of the cow has a big bearing on the value, we'll say it's either or put that caveat in. But it certainly cannot and should not continue as a blank sheet because you don't know where you're going. Then you have the arbitration process, as you rightly identify. In relation to the hardship grant monies, any farmer with an off-farm income is not eligible for them. That's one of the problems. But the biggest problem with the hardship grant monies, Deputy, is the actual rate of pay. It's a maximum payment of €250 a month. Now, whilst it's better than nothing, it certainly does not reflect the additional costs of maintaining 20, 30, 40 weanings if you're a suckler farmer who's set up to sell them in the back end of the year. Equally, from a dairy farmer's perspective, that Deputy Healy-Rae referenced earlier, the €250 does not go any way towards the cost of maintaining those 50 or 60 calves in February, March and April. So fundamental changes that we have sought to that, and you'll have seen from previous submissions, is that any farmer, and it's very easy to cost this and quantify it, if you're forced to maintain animals because of a TB restriction that you ordinarily sold, your AIM system will show if you sold them last year and now you're forced to keep them. And Teagasc have all the costs of maintaining these animals. And these schemes needs to be built on those real-time actual costs to offset the impact on the farm. In relation to, I dealt with the valuation there, the control of deer, Deputy, this has to be national. Because, look, there was good work, or some good work done by the original Deer Management Forum, and 2 or 3 pilot areas were set up in Wicklow to see how you could address this within hotspot areas where studies were done that found 16% of the deer had TB. And the one message here is that it's a multi-stakeholder approach, but somebody has to be in charge, somebody has to be responsible. And our view is that has to be the Department of Agriculture, because they are responsible for TB. And the biggest threat and the most identifiable threat that deer are causing at the moment is TB. And then...
Sorry for interrupting you, but should there... I know there's a fencing grant if you have sheep, but should there not be a thing brought in that you could have, say, higher stakes with sort of a kick out in them, like nearly a football field?
The only point I'd make in that, Deputy, is if you're fencing them out from you, you're probably fencing them into me. And until we deal with the national population and get them pushed back into, as you identified yourself, the areas, their own natural environment, because it's us now that's maintaining the national deer population. The hills have been allowed to come overgrown. They're not fools when they get used to the better feed, the better forage. They're down now along the coast in Wicklow. So this is a national issue that has to be dealt with a national coordinated plan to reduce the numbers. You asked the question about the lesions and the length of time, Deputy, and Deputy Healy-Rae had the same point. And unfortunately, if the status of the lesion cannot be identified under histology, which is done within a few days of the sample going into the lab, which is effectively looking at it under the microscope to determine definitively if it's TB or not, then it has to go on to culture. And the approval of the culture test requires you to get a negative test, a minimum time frame, which is 6 weeks, in the platelet to see does the TB organism grow or not. If it grows, you'll get the positive result a bit earlier. Unfortunately, but there is work being done on other tests that are quicker. The department are starting to run some tests to get early recognition. But what they can tell you, Deputy, is maybe that you'll be restricted a bit sooner. But the difficulty here is, from the point of view of EU animal health law, there is criteria set out and tests identified that you must pass in order to have your trade status established. And it's ultimately down to the trade status, and that's the frustrating thing. But the bigger issue on the lesion, Deputy and Chairman, which Deputy Healy-Rae raised, is that we have a situation in this country, and probably forced on us because of the requirements of EU regulations, that every TB outbreak is the same. Whether you identify 30 TB reactors on your skin test or you have a factory lesion that confirms positive, you're restricted for a minimum of 120 days. But yet, we know in this country that 85% of herds that have a positive factory lesion do not have any more TB reactors. It is not a good indicator of a TB problem on the farm. And we have pushed the department continually to treat those farms differently. If we're putting tighter controls in where there's a lot of TB, we have to counterbalance that. Now, we accept you have to get EU approval for that. But the facts are there, the figures are there, the science is there. We can offset the impact of a lot of these restrictions if we can get that moved forward. Thanks, Deputy.
Just in relation to a couple of points, and Tomas has covered off most of them in fairness, but I think the forum will fall or rise depending on where the financial side of this goes. And I think all of those points that you made, Deputy Fitzmaurice, in relation to valuation, pedigrees, off-farm income, all that kind of stuff, is at the financial working group at the moment, okay? And, you know, where we go as a group there will ultimately deem the success of this programme, okay, and all those things are up for discussion, okay, and there's extra finance involved, and depending on what way we go with those, but that is the ultimate part of this, okay, and it'll rise or fall depending on that. One thing that I think Tomas didn't cover was the vaccines and the badgers in terms of, and we're probably all aware of efficacy of vaccines and things like that, so that's where that comes in. That obviously the vaccine has a different doesn't work on all badgers, and that's where that comes from. Thank you.
Okay. Senator Lombard. Sorry, mate. Sorry, you want to say? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Things to say in terms of the cost of the valuation of animals. Look, there's 97 million on the programme. 17% of that goes on-farm market valuation, 17%. And as you know, that's the difference between the salvage value, the factory price, and the on-farm market valuation. We've argued consistently that the department is getting a bad deal in terms of the price got from factories, and the department's standard response is, to put it in colloquial terms, our hand is in the dog's mouth. But I think that's not good enough. I think the department could do a better deal with meat factories, because it's the differential. And the second part of that is that it seems to us that there is an inordinate amount of money wasted on fighting over a few shillings in terms of objecting to the valuations that are put in place by the independent valuers in the first case. And I think it would be an interesting area for maybe yourselves, and we're trying to do it as well, but maybe the Public Accounts Committee could look at this as well. How much of the 28.5 million is spent on arguing the toss over maybe 50 quid on an animal, or maybe the very tiny percentage of animals that are high value, high merit animals, you know, these things being discussed. And, you know, an arbitration process involves hotels being rented and all that kind of stuff. And, like, I'd just be curious. I think it would be good if we could get to the bottom of it. We haven't been able to get to the bottom of it yet. How much is the department spending on fighting valuations, and how much does that cost in terms of mileage, in terms of all the kind of cost that goes with those inspectors compared to how much is saved? It nearly seems to us that if you actually just accepted the original valuation, the department wouldn't end up spending any more money, except to be slightly more on the valuation and slightly less on the administration. So, look, I think that's worth seeing.